Hello, friends, and welcome to the PrepWell podcast. I'm your host, Phil Black. And if you have an 8th, 9th, or 10th grader with big aspirations, like the Ivy League, or military service academies like West Point, ROTC, or athletic scholarships, boom, you've come to the right place. My specialty, my superpower, if you will, is preparing families for these competitive programs. I'll teach you what your child should do, when they should do it, and how you can help. So stick around and prepare to out-prepare. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the PrepWell podcast. This week, I'd like to propose that we should be grateful and feel blessed for all that's gone on with college admissions this year, from COVID-19 to test optional policies, to the canceling of SAT subject tests, to the additional 500,000 applications that were submitted, to the 3, 4, and 5% admit rates. This was all for the best. And we should be glad and relieved that the process, as we've come to know it, has finally officially broken. The craziness of this year has hastened the death of the traditional college admissions process. And this should be cause for celebration, because it's forcing us to think differently, to behave differently, and project differently. We simply have no choice anymore. But how can this be a good thing? Well, the odds of getting into an MIT or a Yale or a Harvard or other top-ranked colleges have gotten so out of control, not necessarily because the competition has gotten so much better, but because of the ridiculous number of applications submitted to top schools, that we need to change how we approach the application process. We need to change how early we think about this process, how we talk to our children about this process, and what we do to prepare for the new admissions process. And again, this is a good thing, because a lot of us have been living in a dream world in which no matter how selective certain colleges get, we still believe in our heart of hearts that our child is special and different and will beat the odds. Because, they have a 4.499 GPA and they play field hockey and they're really good and they're the president of the student body. And in years past, sometimes we were actually right. Sometimes our children had a chance to beat the odds. A few years ago, when the admit rates weren't in the low single-digit percentages at these schools, there was actually a small chance that a high-performing student at a great high school might actually get into one of these schools. Today, that's no longer true. The odds have gotten too long. Today, the proverbial rock star high school student, what we call in the business the supernova, who is doing all the right things, statistically has not a small chance, but rather almost no chance of getting into one of these schools. There are certainly ways to increase these odds, and that's part of the business that I'm in, but we have to start thinking beyond the short-sighted approach to college and start playing the long game. We have to get out of the mindset that the name of the college that one attends is the most significant factor in the success our children will enjoy down the road. It's a factor. I don't deny that. There's a reason that these schools are so desirable. I went to these schools. My sons are going to one of these schools. My wife went to one of these schools. And if you can get into one of these schools and afford it, I certainly wouldn't turn it down. But since 3 million seniors graduate from high school each year, and the top 10 schools have room for maybe 20,000 of them, 10,000 females and 10,000 males, what happens to the other 2.98 million students? Are they doomed? Of course not. But some students think they are. And some parents in the back of their minds think they are too. The absurdity of admit rates, 3%, 4%, 5%, has finally given us justification to say, screw this, I'm not playing this game. It's given us license to do what we probably should have been doing for years, which is to optimize around a different set of criteria. Instead of the old way of optimizing for GPA and number of volunteer hours and the level of club soccer and absolute number of school clubs. Instead, why don't we optimize in a new way around, number one, what our children care about, number two, where their strengths lie, and number three, providing the tools, the life skills, and the mindset to pursue their life's mission. These are two wildly different approaches to child rearing, especially in the teenage years. And I'm hoping that more and more families will adopt the new strategy. The old approach pushes students to try to be the best at everything, because that's what we think it will take to get into these selective colleges. How do we maximize the number of AP classes? What happens if I don't take this AP exam? Is my GPA high enough? How many volunteer hours do I need? Is it still worth it to commit 18 to 20 hours a week to volleyball and pay $5,000 a month for the privilege? And while all of this is going on in the background at breakneck speed, how many of us ever step back and say, wait a second, time out. Why are we doing all this again? Am I doing this to check boxes, to blow out my resume? Or am I doing this because I love it and it's aligned with my values and it's pointing me in the right direction, no matter what college I go to? If we don't pause for a moment to reflect on what's going on, it's hard to stop. When that train leaves the station, it's hard to pump the brakes. So we keep going and going and going, only to end up picking our heads up in the middle of senior year after not getting into our 3% dream school and wondering what to do now. This should never be the way things end up. Things should end up with students who have thought about what they enjoy doing, who have taken on projects and clubs and activities that will help them reinforce this passion, and have thought about a path forward that would help them take this passion to the next level by conventional or unconventional means. If that means college, great. If that means graduate school, awesome. If that means a gap year, mazel tov. If it means shadowing someone for a year for free, go for it. We're not going to solve this right now during this podcast, but I do believe that we have to think differently. We've been forced to think differently. And maybe this will be better for everyone. Time will tell. So given this new environment, what should you do? By the end of 9th grade, or at the latest 10th grade, you need to make the following assessment. Is my child a hard charger, or do they prefer the status quo? Or where on the spectrum are they? Will my child have the ambition, the motivation, the talent, and the right profile to take a swing for one of the SDSs, the single-digit schools, meaning the schools who admit single-digit percentages of their applicants, the Stanfords, the Yales, the MITs, the Dartmouths, the Amhersts, the Dukes of the world? Or are they more comfortable with the status quo? And they're not interested in SDSs. And of course, there will be kids who are somewhere in between. But I thought it might be a good framework to start out with this continuum of hard charges on the one end and status quo on the other. Let's start with motivation and ambition. This can be hard to quantify in a 15 or 16-year-old, but I think you can make a pretty good guess. Here are some questions to ask. Is college on their radar? Are they interested in these types of highly selective schools? Do they talk about them? Do they have an awareness of what it takes to be competitive at these schools? Have they seen friends or siblings go to these schools and they want to follow in their footsteps? Does their high school have a track record of sending students to these types of schools? Were they or are they interested in PrepWell Academy? Are they staying on top of their weekly PrepWell videos? Are they engaging in conversations with you about these topics? Are they open to speaking to a college counselor like me who will help them assess their prospects? Are they engaging with their guidance counselor? These are the types of questions that will help you diagnose whether or not they're a hard charger or in the status quo camp. If the answers to these questions are affirmative, then your child is a hard charger, and you move on to step 2, which is assessing their talent and their profile. And we'll address those things in a few minutes. If they're not interested or they're lukewarm on the idea, that's okay too. They're comfortable with the status quo. They're pretty much like every other teenager. They're not troublemakers, but they don't have the fire in the gut to get to the next level as it relates to getting into certain colleges. By the way, just because they may be status quo with respect to competing to get into highly selective colleges doesn't mean they're status quo about life. Maybe they're running a successful small business. Maybe they're already a social media influencer. Maybe they're taking over the family business right out of high school. Just because they're not amped up about pursuing the SDSs doesn't have anything to do with their future prospects. It just means that they're not interested in getting on that path, that conventional path right now. Fair enough. That might be the smartest decision they've ever made. Time will tell. If it's the case that you have a status quo child on your hands who doesn't have some kind of burning passion that they're pursuing, then you have 2 choices. Choice number 1, engage with a college counselor like me, who will have a frank discussion with them to see where their head is, just in case they need a little outside influence, and see if this moves the needle in terms of motivation. Or number 2, just leave them to their own devices and be done with it for 6 months or a year. That's it. It doesn't mean they'll be a failure or that you're a bad parent or that they won't get into college or live a prosperous life. It just means that they're not ready to make the leap that is necessary to be competitive at that level in this context. And there's not much you can do about it. Obviously, keep supporting them, encourage them to watch their PrepWell videos, monitor them as needed, keep the dialogue open. But at some point, this has to be their deal. Okay. If you have a hard charger on your hands, what's the next step? Because unfortunately, attitude alone will not get them into Princeton or Harvard. Otherwise, those colleges would admit 80% of the applicants. There's a whole other level to this process beyond their desire to succeed and to go to these schools. So you need to determine if they have the talent and the right profile to get to that level. They have to fit a very specific need for a college, what's known as an institutional priority, or they have very little chance of getting in. And by little, I mean 3%, 4%, 5% chance. I don't care how hard they work, or how many AP classes they took, or how many A's they get, or how many hours of volunteer work they do. They need more than the attitude. They need an angle. They need an angle that helps a college meet its institutional priorities. So, what kind of profiles play well with these colleges? Well, the most obvious one is an athletic profile. Assuming the student has the academics for the type of school they're interested in, a highly desirable athletic profile provides a very direct, transparent, and fast track through admissions in most cases. It's just the way it goes. So if your child is moving in that direction, then there's hope and there's a pretty clear path. You will know by their junior year if they have what it takes to be recruited by these types of schools. And no, this does not magically happen. It takes concerted effort. It takes a full-on marketing campaign that targets the right coaches at the right schools, at the right times, with the right message. All right, what about things other than sports? And there are all kinds of other profiles that may play well, depending on the college and the year and the current institutional priorities and a host of other factors. These profiles are much less direct, they're not as transparent, and it's hard to know whether they'll even work out in the end. Such profiles include students who are incredible leaders, brilliant academics, musicians, performing artists, political activists, students of a certain sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, or underrepresented minority, as well as students who have the ability to pay full tuition, or who are interested in the military, or who live in a certain country or state, and the list goes on. So the question is, do you think that your child will become a student that owns one of these profiles, and that they will be able to compete toe-to-toe within that profile with other students from across the world? That's the question, and that's the bet. Because nobody knows in 9th and 10th grade. You have to make an educated guess. And if you're having a hard time making that judgment, reach out to a counselor, reach out to me, and we can talk about it. So where does that leave us? Let me review the questions and the steps. Number 1, is my child a hard charger or happy with the status quo? At least for now. And for our purposes, when I say hard charger, I mean a student who specifically wants to get into one of these highly selective schools, the SDSs. If they're a hard charger, then what's their angle? And what does their profile look like? And what institutional priority will they be satisfying? And who is helping your student pull all of that together? By the way, this is not an easy question to answer and probably requires a session or 2 or more with a college counselor, somebody like me, to help suss it out. And if they're a hard charger and you've figured out what their angle is, what's the plan to optimize their path? All right, let's move on to the status quo student. If they're a status quo type, then what are the next steps? Number 1, the next steps are ensuring that they do their best to pursue activities that they love, that they're passionate about, that they care about, and that they think they might want to do long term. And stop spending 14 hours a week playing soccer if they don't like it because they think it would look good on their college application. Quit soccer and use those 14 hours to figure out what they actually like. Who cares about soccer? Stop spending every weekend racking up volunteer hours if you're only doing it for the sake of college admissions. Nobody cares how many hours of volunteer work you do. They'd rather that you spend time doing things that you want to continue in college and beyond. And it will serve you much better as well. Now, in both of these cases, for the hard chargers and the status quo types, there is a through line. There is something that every high school student should get a chance to experience, regardless of whether they go to Stanford or a junior college or a technical school. And that is learning the essential life skills that happen to be neatly woven into the college admissions process. And by that I mean learning how to study for a standardized test, learning how to prioritize tasks, learning how to manage medium and long-term projects, understanding the importance of relationships with adults, whether it's teachers or coaches or guidance counselors, admissions officers, learning how to prepare for an interview, how to brainstorm, outline, draft, write, and revise a personal statement, how to brand yourself, how to think about careers, short-term and long-term, how to communicate clearly and with influence. All of these things happen during the college admissions process. These are the skills that will transcend the college you attend. These are the skills that you will use over and over again for the rest of your life. Because not every teenager is ready to fully engage in the college admissions process right now, especially at the highest levels. That's okay. But they still need to learn the steps that will help them when their time comes and when they're interested in something, whether it's starting a business or writing a screenplay or producing a podcast or buying a franchise or joining a startup. They need to know how to do all of these things. And these happen to be the life skills that I teach inside PrepWell Academy. And of course, I give a master class in these skills to my private mentoring students over the course of a few years. So no matter where your child is, on the hard charger to status quo continuum, it would behoove them to engage deeply in PrepWell Academy's weekly videos, to learn these lessons and inoculate themselves from the pressure of where they get in or don't get into college. Because in the end, that will not be the driving factor in where they end up in their lives. That's all I've got for you today, folks. Thank you once again for tuning in. Thank you for the support. If you know a parent with a 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grader, or 11th grader in high school that might find this helpful, please share the episode with them. You can do that by finding that small box with a tiny arrow that points up. That's the share button. Click that share button, text your friends the link to this episode with a little personal note from you recommending that they take a listen. If you have questions, comments, or an idea for an upcoming episode, please reach out to me. You can DM me on Instagram, PrepWell_Academy. Check out our blog, Facebook, connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to hear from you. Until next week, goodbye, good luck, and never stop preparing. This podcast is brought to you by PrepWell Academy. PrepWell Academy is my one-of-a-kind online mentoring program that delivers to your 9th or 10th grader a short, highly relevant video from me every week, every Sunday in fact, where I give them a heads up about what they should be thinking about to stay ahead of the game. To get these valuable lessons into your child's hands, please head over to PrepWellAcademy.com and enroll your child today.